Hello, my friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family. So, guys, why are there so many different types of humans on the planet? Why have there been so many different humanoid species on the planet? Why the genetic diversity? Why do some species go extinct and other ones arise? What is the cause of all these changes? These mutations, perhaps, these different species. We've had so many different types of human beings on this planet, humanoid beings. We have skeletal remains of so many different ones. Why all the diversity? And what truly is going on? What, or better perhaps I should say, who are we really? Who are we really? And exactly what is going on here, and what is our potential? And how do these differences arise? And so it's a fascinating question, and science, philosophy, and religion are all starting to merge. As well, we could throw into that mix mysticism as well, because really, things like that, they're just undiscovered science, something that's not understood yet. So when we look at this symbol, some of you will say this is basically the staff of Hermes. Others will say, well, no, it's the AMA symbol, the AMA. And others will say, well, no, this is much deeper than that. This is really symbolizing evolution. This is symbolizing Kundalini. And many will recognize it for what it is. And, it's really all of the above when you get down to it. So this is the staff of Hermes, who may be known by many names, as we're going to take a look at shortly. And it also shows the flow of energy in the human body, and it also could represent DNA itself, the double helix. As we look over here, we see the different chakras, and we see that the chakras are connected through the two channels, the Ida and the Pingala, which run along each other. And down the center, or I should say up the center, is the Sushumna. And that, when the Kundalini energy rises, unites them all, and that kind of gives us our wings, so to speak. It changes things. And as we're saying, so many people have been on the quest, myself as well, and to figure out who are these beings. Are they really whos? Are they more whats? Many people think it's all astrotheology, and really it's all just, these myths, these gods, they're not individuals, many people believe. They're nothing more than just personifications of planets and stars and events. And other people believe, no, they're real beings. They're 3D beings, that came here in spaceships. And other people believe, no, they're interdimensional beings, or they are, higher intelligence interdimensional beings that can jump back and forth between dimensions. Some believe they exist only on the higher dimensions. Other people view them as nothing but all demons, all evil, really, when you get down to it. And there are definitely similarities through when you start looking at them. So what are these? Who are these beings, or what are these beings? And who and what are we at the same time is a good question. And so, of course, the Anunnaki legends say that they basically took what was here, a primitive species, and they jumped it. They gave it a jump start, changed the DNA, mixed it with some of their own, creating us in their image, so to speak. And through the manipulation of DNA and adding theirs to our mix, gave us Homo sapiens sapiens, perhaps eventually, as there were probably other types that came along the way, and it all depends on what we choose to believe, because there's a lot of evidence out there for many different ways to look at things. And so, is this really actual events with actual beings changing our DNA? Is it symbolic? Because we have the winged disc, which, does it symbolize Nibiru, or does it symbolize the sun going through a different phase? And if you take it as the sun going through a different phase, as we see the light shining there, then is it really the sun which is changing the DNA, which is changing the beings on the planet? And does that happen at regular intervals? We see here this Anunnaki, this deity, but again, these deities are not the source of all life in the universe. They're not prime creator. They're not God with a big G. And that's part of the whole confusion with things. Why is he holding a pine cone? Well, if you've watched any of my old videos, and many others have talked about this as well, the pine cone symbolizes the pineal gland. There's pine cones everywhere in the Vatican because they understand the symbolism, and the symbolism goes straight on down and through. And so it's through using the pineal gland that the changes come about. And it's, again, changes in the DNA. And here you have this, half bird, half humanoid being, again, holding a pine cone and using it as a tool. So the pine cone, the pineal gland, is a tool for changing the DNA. And, of course, many believe that these beings are not even necessarily what we would say is a normal humanoid being, but reptilian, as we see many of these figures all over the world, both in Mesoamerica and over also in Babylon, Iraq, all throughout the Middle East. And we see very, very similar ones all over the world when you get down to it. So it's pretty fascinating. So cosmic rays. Now we know we're going through a pole shift. And, the magnetosphere is in decline, and that's giving us, we've never registered UVC at ground level before, but we are registering it now. And many are suspicious that this is part of what's going on with the trees dying all around us. And there is a huge die-off of life going on right now. We see it. We cover it every day. We talk about it every day. And so cosmic rays are coming in, and they are definitely making changes to DNA. And of course, the mainstream will tell you cancers are going to increase, and perhaps they will. That's what we do see with an increase in cosmic radiation. But perhaps also it does change the DNA of everything on the planet. And so they're still studying, where all these cosmic rays come from. Interestingly enough, when stars go nova or supernova, they give off a lot of cosmic rays. And so there is the line of thought that our sun right now is going through a change, and we could look up and see it. And, when you have a blessing of a chemtrail-free sky, and you could clearly see the sun, it looks way larger than it used to look, way larger. And also, many of us believe there's something up there that's right in front of it or right next to it, and it's, something that's constructed. Sun simulator, we could use that term. So cosmic rays, neutrons, and the mutation rate in evolution. I have all the links for you guys to go through this. Cosmic rays cause mutation. They change our DNA. We are being bombarded with more cosmic rays now than we have in our known history. So this astronaut who has a twin, he went out and he spent slightly over a year in space, and he came back and his DNA was changed. And we have evidence of the magnetosphere being anywhere from 14% to perhaps as much as 20 or 25% decreased. So you can imagine how many more cosmic rays are coming in. We are feeling it. Everybody is feeling different, for lack of a better word. There's definitely the feeling that the energies around us, the energies that are going through us, are different than what we've seen before. So we've discovered so much lately. We've discovered all these different type of humanoid beings that have lived on this planet. Some, like this one that we're looking at here, is the size of a hobbit. So many of our legends, so many of our myths, perhaps they do have basis in fact as you look at the size difference. Now this is a being that lived on the planet, and interestingly enough disappeared in between 40 and 50,000 years ago. And this is what he would look like. Very, very humanish. Actually look a lot like a lot of Aborigines would look. So here again, this is the same type in a female. And to the left there, you have what is called a Denisovan, which was a cousin to the Neanderthal, which we just recently discovered again. And Denisovans and Neanderthals, they were concurrent with us. And you see different types here, Australopithecus africanus, and we have Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalis, and Homo sapiens. And I've read where many people think that it was probably Homo erectus that was tinkered with by the Anunnaki. It's all up to the individuals to sort out and come to their own beliefs after hopefully doing a lot of research instead of just taking a position without doing the research. And here you see some differences between a Neanderthal on the left and Homo sapiens sapiens on the right. And we do know that most people have Neanderthal DNA in them. So we did cross the species and did live concurrently for a while. And we see some more humanoid types. And there's evidence that these things really did exist. There's tons of evidence that the giants existed. I can't tell you how many instances of finding giant bodies, especially when people when the Europeans first came to the United States and it came to America, they were finding these bodies everywhere. And most of them ended up in the hands of the Smithsonian, which rumors say were dumped in the Atlantic. And here you see this is basically a fossilized body, mummified, of a woman holding her baby. And you could see she's quite tall. As we see, we have had instances of many giants in our history and so many legends, and I've shared those with you, what I found here of the legends of Junaluska, which had to be very, very a large being. And I've shared with you a photograph of what's supposed to be the handprint on Junaluska rock, which is about 25 miles from where I am right now, and it's fascinating. There's so many legends of giants through the Cherokees, as well as many, when you get down to it, pretty much all of the Native American tribes knew of the giants. They also knew of what we would call Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and they are different beings. They are different, but they believe they did exist. Not only that, but the natives also believed in the little people. And many of the locals here believe in little people too, the same little people that we hear of in Ireland and over in England as well. And these just show you a few of the giant remains that have been unearthed and documented in the historical records. And some of them are huge, as you see, 36, 25 foot going on down to the present day. And so over here, extinct human species live together in Siberian cave, new research shows. And this is talking again about Neanderthals and Denisovans. And so again, when did they disappear? Well, around that same timeline that little hobbit-like creature disappeared. So that makes me wonder, was there some sort of triggering event? Was there some sort of event perhaps with the sun? And perhaps, or it could be that they were hunted out. People will say, a lot of scientists will say that they were hunted to extinction by Homo sapiens sapiens, as is the case with most of the giants as well. perhaps, there was some sort of plague, some sort of biological agent that came along that only affected them because of their genetics, and we made it through. Or perhaps there was intervention and, higher powers, whether we call them Anunnaki or God or whoever, the gods, decided it was time to end that experiment. And so here the Hobbit human story gets a twist thanks to thousands of rat bones. And apparently they made a diet of living off of rats, a lot of these huge rats. As you see, picture of one of them carrying his kill back home to have for dinner. And so, it's fascinating. And you can see that they lived in this one cave for a long period of time. They were saying, like a long stretch, over 100,000 years. But about 50,000 years ago, they disappeared. And so it's interesting, the timeline. Same thing with the Denisovans, the Human Genome Project. And so we've learned a lot about DNA itself, and also the quote-unquote junk DNA. It's all very interesting as we're learning more and more. And this is talking about different genetic diseases. And, of course, some people have gone to the extreme of, and some will take exception to me making that statement of, finding out you have a predisposition genetically to some sort of condition, and then going ahead and doing like what Angelina Jolie did and having her breast chopped off because of a predisposition for breast cancer. So, we have learned an awful lot about genetic sequencing, and we've learned about the connections with diseases through that, and that tendencies for or not. Scientists are pushing for a moratorium on the human germline editing, basically CRISPR, the CRISPR technology, and more than that too. I mean, we have over in China, they've genetically edited babies that were born, and that's going to definitely make a lot of people feel like it's just something we shouldn't do, that we're playing God, and then there's other people that will say, hey, this is how we're going to control things, this is how we're going to rise above, and this is how we're going to make humans perhaps someday immortal. And so it's very interesting to look into it. And one of the things that we're finding about junk DNA is that, perhaps it's not junk at all. As this says, junk DNA may help yeast survive stress. And so if you wondered, is there junk DNA in other forms of life? Yes, there is. It's not just humans that have junk DNA. And then this article out of the Daily Mail, humans of the future could regrow limbs. DNA switch that controls genes for regeneration used by worms to grow back their bodies after being cut in half is discovered. So what lies ahead of us? And if we are thinking about terms of more advanced beings coming here, think of the technology that they could have. What if they were, just 50,000 years ahead of us? Which is nothing in the big time scheme of things. Their technology could look insane to us. We might not even recognize it. And perhaps by that time they've figured out how they can make themselves live almost indefinitely, just simply by turning something on or turning something off genetically. And so when we look at this, we see full-body regeneration is seen in jellyfish, sea anemones, and planarian worms. Junk DNA controls the activation of a gene called early growth response, EGR. Humans have EGR to repair cells, but it doesn't trigger large-scale regeneration. Why? And could that be changed? Researchers are now trying to change the gene so we too can regenerate. Can you imagine if you if you were in a war or in an accident, lost an arm, lost a leg, it could be regenerated. That's I was going to say insane, but perhaps it's not. Perhaps it's not, because some do. And when you get down to it at a cellular level, there's a lot of similarities there. And this is saying, is junk DNA what makes humans unique? Non-coding regions of our genome may be linked, maybe the key, to how our brains develop as we look at these neural pathways. And it's fascinating. And again, it might surprise you that something as something like a fruit fly actually has more genes than us, but it's not the number or the volume. It's how things are coded. And this is about the mysterious jumping gene that appears 500,000 times in human DNA and actually makes up 17% of our genome. And again, scientists are only just starting to figure out, what does it do? How does it work? We're still in the infant stages with this, but it does have tremendous potential. And again, tremendous potential for good or evil, depending on how it's used. And of course, with the track record of the big corporations, it gives one a good reason to be nervous as we think about things like what we've seen in movies like Resident Evil, when you start thinking about mutations. But ultimately, DNA, it's where light is encoded. And ultimately, light is information. And that's part of where we're going with all this. And this is part of, the bigger picture here. And here we're talking about junk DNA that might be responsible for certain diseases. And DNA gets a new and bigger genetic alphabet. And so this is very interesting because DNA is spelled out with 4 letters or bases. Researchers have now built a system with 8, and it may hold clues to the potential for life elsewhere in the universe and could also expand our capacity to store digital data on Earth. And it gets into it again, and we could look at this so many different ways. And so, looking into this, natural DNA is spelled out with 4 different letters known as bases, A, C, G, and T. So Dr. Benner and his colleagues have built DNA with 8 bases, 4 natural, 4 unnatural. They named their new system Hachi-Moji DNA. Hachi is Japanese for 8, Moji for letter, 8 letter. Crafting the 4 new bases that don't exist in nature was a chemical tour de force. They fit neatly into DNA's double helix, and enzymes can read them as easily as natural bases in order to make molecules. We can do everything here that's necessary for life, said Dr. Benner, now a distinguished fellow at the Foundation for Applied Molecular Evolution in Florida. Hachi-Moji DNA could have many applications, including a far more durable way to store digital data that could last for centuries. This could be huge that way, said Dr. Nicholas V. Hudd, a biochemist at Georgia Institute of Technology who was not involved in the research. It also raises a profound question about the nature of life elsewhere in the universe, offering the possibility that 4-base DNA we are familiar with may not be the only chemistry that could support life. The 4 natural bases of DNA are all anchored to a molecular backbones. A pair of backbones can join into a double helix because their bases are attracted to each other. The bases form a bond with their hydrogen atoms. But bases don't stick together at random. C can only bond to G and A can only bond to T. These strict rules help ensure DNA strands don't clump together into a jumble. No matter what sequence bases are contained in natural DNA, it still keeps its shape. But those 4 bases are not the only compounds that can attach DNA's backbone and link to another base. At least on paper, Dr. Benner and his colleagues thought up a dozen alternatives. So working at Swiss University, Dr. Benner tried to make some of those imaginary bases real. Of course, the first thing you discover is your design theory is not terribly good, said Dr. Benner. Once Dr. Benner and his colleagues combined real atoms according to his designs, the artificial bases didn't work as he hoped. Nevertheless, his initial forays impressed other chemists. His work was a real inspiration for me, said one other researcher. And so he tried to create his own bases, and he chose not to make his bases that linked together with hydrogen bonds. Instead, he fashioned a pair of oily compounds that repel water. That chemistry brought his unnatural pair of bases together. Oil doesn't like to mix with water, but it does like to mix with oil. So in the years that followed, he and his colleagues fashioned enzymes that could copy DNA made from both natural bases and unnatural oily ones. In 2014, the scientists engineered bacteria that could make new copies of these hybrid genes. And so in recent years, Dr. Romsberg's team has begun making unnatural proteins from these unnatural genes, and he founded a company, Synthorx, to develop some of these proteins as cancer drugs. At the same time, he continued with his own experiments. He and his colleagues succeeded in creating one pair of new bases. And like Dr. Romsberg, they found the application for their unnatural DNA. Their 6-base DNA became the basis of a new sensitive test for viruses and blood samples. They then went on to create a second pair of new bases. Now with 8 bases to play with, the researchers started building DNA molecules with a variety of different sequences. The researchers found that no matter which sequence they created, the molecules still formed the standard double helix. Because Hashimoji DNA held onto its shape, it could act like regular DNA. It could store information, and that information could be read to make a molecule. For a cell, the first step in making a molecule is to read a gene using a special enzyme, then make a copy of the gene in a single-stranded version of DNA called RNA. And depending on the gene, the cell will then do one of two things with the RNA. In some cases, it will use the RNA as a guide to build a protein, but in other cases, the RNA molecule just floats off to do a job of its own. And so Dr. Benner and his colleagues created a Hashimoji gene for an RNA molecule. They predicted that the RNA molecule would be able to grab a molecule called a fluorophore. Cradled by the RNA molecule, the fluorophore would absorb light and release it as a green flash. Andrew Ellington, an evolutionary engineer at the University of Texas, led the effort to find an enzyme that could read Hashimoji DNA. He and his colleagues found a promising one made by a virus, and they tinkered with it until the enzyme could easily read all 8 bases. And they mixed the enzyme in test tubes with the Hashimoji gene, and as they had hoped, their test tubes began glowing green. So think about that and think what that means. For one, again, DNA and giving off light. And many of you might be aware of biophotons. And biophotons, basically, they give off light. They give off information. And this gets into energy healing and why energy healing works. Because it's the transfer of information. And whether we call it Reiki, QiGong, laying on of hands, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't matter because the DNA responds to intent. And also this junk DNA that is out there, we could view it as also perhaps being DNA that is more like what we have when we view waves and particles. When we look at the famous double slit experiment, which shows us that basically it's the observer. Again, it's the observer. It's the observer creates the reality. And this again shows how some DNA is simply just DNA that is laying there in potential. In potential. And we can change our DNA with our intent. And this is again another article out of Yahoo News talking about that DNA switch that controls genes for whole body regeneration. And as it says, humans one day may have the ability to regrow limbs. And the sky is the limit. And so this links into the light body, how the light body is linked to DNA and your health. And so in order to understand how and why light is critical to your health, it's helpful to understand some of the research that has been undertaken on DNA since the 1970s by Russian and German physicists. Unfortunately, most practitioners in the UK and US are totally unaware of the research into physics and quantum physics, as we tend to be more focused on biochemistry for health. And of course, we rarely read Russian or German research papers. Leading German practitioner Dietrich Klinghardt, Global Integrative Practitioner of the Year for 2007, commented that in general practitioners, they're overeducated in biochemistry and undereducated in physics. When I'm in Germany, I say the opposite. You guys are overeducated in physics and you're undereducated in biochemistry. And this gets into the phantom DNA effect. So there was an experiment in the 80s that was dubbed the phantom DNA effect study. Dr. Paponin is a quantum physicist who is recognized worldwide as a leading expert in quantum biology, including nonlinear dynamics of DNA and the interactions of weak electromagnetic fields with biological systems. He is currently senior research scientist at the Institute of Biochemical Physics at the Russian Academy of Sciences, and is currently working with the Institute of Heart Math, which we talked about, and you could go check out the Schumann resonance there, in a collaborative research project between IHM and the RAS. So in the experiment, Paponin shone mild laser light on a sample of DNA placed in a tiny quartz crystal container. The DNA was then observed with the equipment that enables the observer to see single photons of light. And what Paponin claimed to have found is that DNA acted like a sponge and absorbed the light. It stored the light in a corkscrew-shaped spiral. That's interesting as well, right? Because we see that shape everywhere, and we found it in caves. We've seen it all over. It's a very important shape. He reported that an unknown force holds the light in the same place for up to 30 days after the DNA molecule itself has been removed from its influence. And, this has been repeated. So what I'm trying to get at is that, again, there's a lot of ways of looking at things. But one thing we could take from everything going on right now is that we are absorbing light. Light is information. Light is information. It's information coming to us. The sun is a relay. So the sun, it's not so much that the sun is generating this light through nuclear processes. It's more that the sun is a single neuron in the network that connects everything together. So think of it more in those terms, because the stars are connected in their own neural network. And so information is sent down to us through this neural network. And you could view that neural network going all the way back to source, God, however you want to call the ultimate power that there is. And that is the chain effect that is going on right now. The changes in the sun are really coming from source when you look at it in the bigger scheme of things. And it is a process that is going to change us as well. And that is not necessarily a bad thing. It really is not. And it depends on how we view it. It's the lens in which we view it. And so our intent, our focus, our energy, our emotions are so important in these times. They're of the utmost importance. And so, of course, we want to take in the information that's coming from the sun. And obviously, there are attempts to block that information from coming into us, because you could view it as information is coming from source through the sun, and it's meant for us. It's meant for us to absorb and then to learn from and to change and to grow. And these darker powers are trying to make it so we do not get this information, and so that we are not able to grow, because perhaps we would grow completely out of their reach, and perhaps that is what's going to happen. So be aware of that. And then on another level, this is also showing the power that we have within us, because our DNA is storage. You could view it as, this DNA is storage for information. So our DNA is mutating in order to be able to store this increased information. And we have these stories going on and reports of people that have 3-strand DNA, and the thought that we're going to go to 12-strand DNA because we're going to have to change in order to store all this information that is coming into us. And this is our destiny, and this is the bigger plan. And this is what's going to manifest that new world that we've all heard of in our different religious traditions and philosophies, manifesting that heaven on earth. And it all comes ultimately from Source through the Sun to us. And so again, we are not to have fear about this, because ultimately this is something that's positive, and it's something that is, destined in so many ways. And again, it brings me back to that Bible verse. Lo, I will tell you a secret. We shall not all die, but we shall all be changed. So my friends, as always, thumbs up, support the channel. Please do subscribe and click the bell, get all the notifications, share with as many as possible. Let's keep waking people up more and more every day, and let's work together in this and figure all these things out in a peaceful, non-dogmatic way with love and compassion. God bless, my friends. Look forward to your comments. Namaste.